On the point of that man that you were walking with, looking down at the foundations being built of the Ramot Mall, it's a bigger question. You've been around the Torah learning world for a pretty long time. And an observation that I think a lot of people, I'm not sure if it's coming from a cynical place, it's come from a place of confusion for people that maybe are not involved religiously, of looking at the religious Jewish world. I'm not going to speak about other religions. We're Jewish. We're speaking about the Jewish people, and especially because you've had tremendous experience, and you sit now on a bet din. You sit on a court of Jewish law, and you're a teacher, and you're a community leader. My question is this: how is it that so often we see that students of the Torah, full-time, part-time, whatever, they don't reach this place through the study of Torah, of this emotional place of understanding the relationship is so important in living a life as a human being first, and to how is it missed so often, and how do we see it missed? And again, I don't want to point finger at any particular group, because you can see it in all the religious groups. But as a person who came in from the cold, it was pretty obvious that there are people who are religious who are not particularly into God, and who are particularly studious of God's word, but the emotional side is severely lacking, and you can see it in their behavior, and you can see it in their, if you like, the performance of their duties, and then it becomes God priority religious behavior and not people. And I think that bothers a lot of people, and understandably so. I'm not of that type of way. You're not of that way, because I know you well, and many others that we know and we cherish. But it seems strange that it happens so often. What do you think is the reason for that?
So, first of all, it's a broad question, but let me focus on one element of it, and that is that we've all got a certain, I guess, disposition, inclination towards superficiality, towards the superficial.
Right.
And that's true whether you're a religious Jew, observant, Charedi, ultra-Orthodox,
anything,
secular, the works,
100%.
Jewish, non-Jewish, doesn't make a difference.
It's the human condition.
We've all got a certain disposition towards the superficial. The superficial, as it were, is more comfortable, convenient, less demanding, less challenging. It's all good, right? It's all good. Yeah, Baruch Hashem. So, either you're saying you're Baruch Hashem's, or you're saying it's all good, or you're saying it's all right, mate. Whatever it is you're saying, we've got a certain disposition towards the superficial. And when you translate that disposition into a Torah life, then it's looking at the mitzvot themselves as being something superficial, just going through the rotes, going through the motions, and if you're observant, then that's what you'll be doing. But you'll be translating that disposition into a Torah framework. While the Torah framework itself, all of the mitzvot, how are they given to us in the Torah? Let's look at the Torah for a minute. What is the Torah? What is the Bible? What is it? You know what it is? It's a history book. It's a book of stories. It's anecdotes. It's a storybook. About what? About a nation. About a nation. What's this nation doing? This nation is going through its history, its most foundational covenantal history, within a relationship with God. That is what the Torah is all about. It's about the beginnings of that nation that happened together with God, with Abraham, Avram Avinu, and God, as it were, revealing himself to Avram Avinu and telling him, Lech Lecha, get up and go. That's where it all begins. To coming out of Egypt, where God reveals himself to the nation, to receiving the Torah, to entering into the land of Canaan, land of Israel, to setting up the kingdom, the kingship of David HaMelech, the Davidic dynasty, Shlomo HaMelech, and then through all the rest of it. Let's not get into too many details. But that is what the Torah is. It's a book of a story of a nation and its relationship with God, its ups and downs. And within that book, within that narrative of the story of our relationship, you've got the mitzvot. Meaning the mitzvot are a part of that relationship. They're a part of that connection. Now, they can be taken as being independent because mitzvot are practical obligations, right? And they're institutionalized, right? Like everything, you need an institution. Education is wonderful, and we have educational institutions.
Just bring the mic a little bit close to your mouth, just a little bit.
Here we go.
Yeah, that's good. You all right?
Relationships are great, but they're also institutionalized. You get married, you tie the knot, and then you're in an institution of marriage. And whenever you're in an institution, you run the risk of highlighting the superficial, of going through the motions. That's true of every institution in the world. And the challenge is to not look at the framework, but to look at what's inside the framework, to look at its content, to look at the meaning. What's that framework trying to hold? The framework is very important because if you only look at if you only have the content, if you only have faith and it's something which is airy-fairy, then one day you'll wake up on the right foot, everything will be great, you're full of faith, you'll pray with fervor, and then everything will be wonderful. And then the next day things will be awful, and you say, oh, just chuck this, I'm not doing anything, right? So we need those institutions. We want to tie the knot. We don't want to be dating all of our lives, because then you won't have commitment, and then it's not going to take you anywhere. So you need that commitment, you need that framework, you need that institution. But then the challenge is, once you've got that institution, to not be caught up, right, with a framework, but rather to be involved, to be engrossed, to be in that, to be in shira shirim mode, right, in the love, in the relationship, and not to be. The Vilna Gaon speaks about this. The Vilna Gaon, I won't go into it at length, but he says, there's the mitzvot. He says that's the superficial part of Judaism, and he says, what's the internal, what's the inner core of Judaism? He says it's trust in God. That's the inner core, right? And he says that's the difference between the people in the time of the first Beis HaMikdash and the second Beis HaMikdash, right? The first temple and the second temple. They were both destroyed, but the first one was destroyed, and after 70 years we got the second one. The second one was destroyed, and we're still waiting. So clearly the time of the first temple, we were in better shape than in the time of the second temple. Says the Vilna Gaon, based on the Gemara, says the Vilna Gaon, in the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, internally they were strong. They had trust in God. Superficially they were awful. They had idolatry, the Gemara tells us they had idolatry, and they had arayos, meaning sexual sin, and they had shvichas damim, murder. So they were idolatrous, murderous, and sexually licentious. They had all of the big sins, but internally they were good. In the second temple, superficially, they were great.
Oh, I see.
Superficially, they had everything going for them. They had gemilut chasadim. They were even nice to each other, and they had Torah study. They had Torah, and they had
academies of Torah study,
and they had mitzvot, and they had gemilut chasadim. They were doing kindness to each other, but internally they didn't have it. So we see that the internal is at the end of the day, it's about internal. You need the framework. Without the framework, you get lost. It's like you need to get up in the morning at a good time, and you have to go to bed at a normal time, and you need to structure your day properly. You've got to have a framework. Without the framework, it doesn't work. You've got to go through motions, and if you're married, you've got to say goodnight nicely, and you've got to give a kiss. You need the structure. Right. You need the framework. But what's it all for? We're not married to fulfill our marriage vows. We're married because of love, because of relationship, because of the internal, the inner stuff.
Connecting to your spouse,
your
connection,
children. Of course. That's what it's all about. So unfortunately, sometimes people get lost in the superficial part.
But you'd think, though, that the Torah would have enough power within itself during its study that a pretentious or a superficial learner will be transformed, especially when you're around wonderful teachers And yes, it does happen. It's obvious it happens. Look how many wonderful people we know who are scholars and who are great human beings. But I guess what I'm saying is, how come sometimes it just doesn't? And the standard answer I've got is, well, people will be people. Well, obviously.
It's more than people will be people. The Torah has the power to transform. It really does. And I've seen it. I've seen it multiple times. The Torah has the power to transform. But it only has the power to transform if you're open to that transformation. It's about, you've got to be open to it. Often, people who are studying Torah are not necessarily open to that. You know why they're studying? Because they were born into the system. They're just studying because that's what we do. We study Torah, that's what we do. Now, sometimes...
Or just scared of Hashem.
Or, yeah.
That could be a reason.
Or we're studying out of fear, could be.
Mm-hmm.
Could be. Ultimately, mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma, the Gemara tells us that someone who studies, even if he's not doing it for the right reasons,
We'll come to it.
he'll come to it in the end. And do you know why? I think because usually there'll be that moment when he is open.
Right.
Something happens in his life that
Everything will
opens him
click.
up, something that pierces that shield, something that, renders him more vulnerable, as it were, more open.
And he's got all that background, and
then exactly, and then it seeps in.
That's very nice.
And then it penetrates. But you know what? Not always.
No.
Sometimes it won't happen, and it's a shame. But it's about being open to it. In Tehillim, Psalms, the pasuk says, "Anochi Hashem Elokecha." I'm Hashem. I'm Hashem, your God. Hamalcha me'eretz Mitzrayim. I brought you out. I took you forth from the land of Egypt. And you know why? Why did I do that? Why did I take you forth from the land of Egypt? Very simple. Harchev picha, so you'll open up your mouth. Open your mouth, va'amaleu, and I'll fill it. God took us out of Egypt to give us all of his bounty, to give us his blessing, to give us everything. But we've got to open our mouths. And if we don't open up our mouths, if we don't render ourselves open for his bounty, for his blessing, meaning to turn to him in an act of receiving and an act of being open to that blessing, then we're not going to get it. And it's the same thing is true about learning Torah. If you're not open to the message, to that power
Right.
of the Torah is God. It's the word of God. It's being open to God. But you've got to be open. If you're not open, then it's not going to have that effect.
Wow, that's true. So it almost precedes the learning. There's a mental state of mind that is going to be the healthiest mindset as you approach Torah study. It's not just the Torah study, but then I like what you said. Keep at it, in the hope that
Absolutely.
even if that person's not aware of the hope. It's just interesting that we pride ourselves as Jews on being very kind, compassionate people. It always makes me laugh that the world's got it in for us, and especially like Israel. And like if you're being really sensible, you just say, what do you think we're going to do? Like honestly, there's only a few of us. What do you honestly think we're going to do as a state, as a people? And obviously they see us in a certain way, which goes into the whole anti-Semitism thing, which is not a subject for now. But this mindset.
No, to be fair, Jews are kind and compassionate people. They've done a lot. They do a lot. They've done a lot. Even Jews that I find are distant from religion.
Oh, amazing!
Are often amazing people.
Amazing.
Even ones with mindsets and with attitudes and ideologies
and cynicism
that are far from me, but look at their dedication to causes, to human causes, even the tikkun olam concept, which is often very distant from Jewish traditional practice, but it's coming from somewhere. And by the way, even that's why the framework is so important. You're going to give charity, even if you don't have it internally, even if you're not opened or whatever it is, all the things that we've been speaking about, but you're still going to give your charity if you're an observant Jew, because you have to, because that's the mitzvah.
Which is a good thing.
And again, and doing it time and again also develops that compassion. Like the Rambam says, right, if you're going to give charity and you've got a choice, give a lot once or give many times smaller amount. Give the smaller amount many times, because that's going to induce, that's going to penetrate, that's going to train you in compassion. It's going to train you into being a more caring person. And, the framework invites you. The superficial framework invites you to go deeper. It invites you to internalize those messages. And if you do them often enough, and if you do them, and like I said, you're going to have that state of mind, that mood where, wow, you say, wow, those mitzvahs are covenantal. They are teaching me something, that they're a value system. They're not just going through the motions.
Do you think that if you know in yourself, again, with humility, that you say, hey, I'm a person that loves this. I'm a person that loves this structure, this life. I embrace it. And you see that other people don't. Someone once said to me, if you see something in someone else that is not quite right, it's not to say you're perfect, but you just happen to see in someone else that's not quite right. This person said to me, he said, Hashem gave you those eyes and that perception to help that person shift and move. That's why you can see. He may not be able to see, and the other person may not be able to see, but you can see. And try, if you can, to try and help that person, not with like immense pressure, with friendliness.
Not immense, but just a sledgehammer.
Just a sledgehammer. Just a few knuckle dusters.
David Goodwin style pressure.
Well, I don't operate that way, but you know what I mean. Just because at the end of the day, we just want. Like for instance, with me, I'm indebted to specifically me. I'm indebted to a few people in London, and one group probably more than any is the Orsameh of the Jaeli, okay, Rabbi Kirsch, Rabbi Tatz, Rabbi Stepsky, all these wonderful people, Rabbi Hill, there's a long list, Rabbi Ross, Johnny Ross, love it. You know Johnny Ross?
Sure.
Why did those people step out? The idea of stepping out and say, do you know what? Let's make an attempt at trying to show what Judaism really has got to offer. A little bit like this conversation, but just on a organizational scale with a building, and let's put classes on it. Well, I can tell you, not that was the reason I became religious, but it definitely helped. I was already involved a little bit before that. That's where I went next. But that reaching out is a very, very, very special thing. Because we didn't have to do it. We could just sit and I'm all right, Shabbat, and I'm all right with Hashem. It seems like we really only want to reach out because we really care about our fellow Jews. We're not trying to convince anyone, make you religious, which is, I've said before, is an absolutely ridiculous thing. Where we're coming from is, hey, there's a really good thing going on, and we'd like to offer you to see, to demonstrate to you, to show you. There's something great in this for you.
Well, let me just give two very short reactions to that, and one of them is that absolutely we have a concept of mutual responsibility. That idea of mutual responsibility is the idea that we are let me take a step back. We live in a world that's deeply imbued by the kind of liberal perspective on life and on human beings, and it's a very kind of, I guess you could call it, an atomic perspective. We're all atoms floating around in a great world, and we've all got our specific characteristics, but we're very individualistic. Each man for himself, each man on his own, as it were, and the truth of the matter is that human nature is not atomic by nature. I often say we're more molecular, we're more molecules than we are atoms, meaning right. we're many atoms that cling together to form a molecule. So we're more molecular than we are atomic. But certainly in the Judaism sense, if you look at the Torah doesn't speak much to individuals. Here and there, you've got references that might be speaking to...
in a singular form.
Well, the Torah uses singular form often.
Right.
But it uses singular form speaking to the entire nation.
As one, which is pluralistic in of itself.
And the entire Torah, the ups and downs of the Torah are the ups and downs of the Jewish people.
Right, the nation.
It's about a nation. It's about this body of a Jewish people that has a relationship with God, and it's about the trials and tribulations and ups and downs of that relationship. And that means that, I'm an individual, of course, and the Torah tells us, Adam was created alone, and we're all individuals, and we've all got personal responsibility, and that's a big theme in the Torah, that personal responsibility, that I'm responsible.
And I matter.
And for sure I matter, for sure I have responsibility. But that responsibility, it's not just for myself. It's not just for my own 4 cubits, for my own home. It goes beyond that. It transcends myself. It includes my family, it includes my community, my society, the whole Jewish people, the world. The responsibility is much bigger. And that's what the Torah is about. It's about each one of us being a part of the entire Jewish people, being a part of this great nation that has a relationship. It's not my own relationship with God. It's my relationship as a part of the Jewish people. Because otherwise, who cares if you're born Jewish or born Hindu or born Christian? What's the difference? Right. The answer is no, you're born into a certain community, a certain nation, and that defines your relationship with God. You've got a relationship as a part of it, and that's why we care. That's why we care about every Jew. And like you said, and that this is the second part I want to make, it's not about missionizing. It's about feeling a certain, I feel a certain, I guess you could say, distress or discomfort with the fact that so many Jews have never experienced the relationship with God, have never experienced living a Torah lifestyle, a lifestyle with mitzvot, which gives you this framework of being in a relationship with God, of the beauty of Shabbat.
Not from a critical point of view at all.
No, they just never experienced it. And it's about making that experience, as it were, available, making it possible. Just, opening people up to the possibility. There's so many people who have grown up so distant and so, in whether it's because of, family circumstances or geographical circumstances or whatever it might be for so many different reasons, who have just never been able to experience that. So it's about opening up that option. You don't make someone from. I happens to be, I very much, object to such a statement, making someone from. You don't make someone from.
No.
You open up the option and you allow him to make an informed decision. That the problem is that often the decisions that we make are so badly informed. Where, we don't have those options. People growing up in, ultra liberal societies, those options are just not available. They're not a part of your mindset. They're not a part of your horizon. You're growing up in a place where you don't have that option, and it's just about making that option available, making it a real choice, and then let the person choose. Each person. That's a big principle of Jewish life, is free will, right? Free choice. You're not, even as a rabbi, a lot of people ask me many questions about life, about mitzvot, about halacha. I try my best not to tell people what to do. Now and again, there's a straight halachic answer, permitted, forbidden, I don't know. But generally speaking, you present the options, you try to sharpen the different sides of the discussion, of the decision that needs to be made, and then it's up to you. It's your decision, it's your prerogative, it's your responsibility, it's up to you. That's what the Torah wants, that we should choose good, but to choose good.
That's a very open way of looking at the structure of Jewish living in terms of how you give out halachic advice. We also see, though, there is an element of insecurity within certain elements of the religious world because for some reason, they want to protect themselves and say, no, we must do like this. What's the fear? I mean, I know it's a big question and it's a cultural clash and it's the times we're living and the state of Israel and what does it mean and we're in, we're out, we're not with... But you see in groups, they're like, we've just got to surround ourselves with these walls to protect ourselves. But what are they actually protecting themselves from? Like you say, present it, have faith in the other Jew that's sitting or standing opposite you, and say, you choose.
Okay, so let me respond in 2 ways. First of all, thinking from a more individual perspective, and now not as the whole community. From an individual perspective, we often like to, as it were, to delegate responsibility. We don't like taking responsibility so much, and therefore, we'll go to a doctor and we say, doctor, you just tell me what to do. I don't want to know, right? I don't want to be responsible for this. And we'll go to a rabbi I will say, Rabbi, you tell me, I want this off my shoulders. We don't embrace responsibility so much. We have a human disposition to shirk or to kind of wiggle our way out of taking those responsibilities. And that's a natural disposition. And we need to remind ourselves often that it's our responsibility. We send kids to school. I say, all right, we've done that, We've done our bit. We've sent our kids to school. Now we don't have to worry about education. No, dear parent, education takes place at home. You can get a lot of knowledge out of school. You can get social skills. But education, what we've been speaking about, being open to relationships, the basics, the crux of life, that's home. That's a parental responsibility. Nobody else is going to do that for you. And the same is true of many things. But at the same time, we have this disposition, a leaning towards, delegating those things that we should be responsible for. And often we need to, work to overcome that. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, in terms of the isolationist tendency that certain communities have, there are stages in life. And not every stage in life is appropriate for every level of choice or exposure or being a part of that wider world. So I understand absolutely, and I do this myself, making informed decisions about what I want my family to be exposed to, what I want my kids to be exposed to, and to be entirely honest, what I want myself to be exposed to.
Right.
We're all humans. We all have our
boundaries.
Yeah. We all need our boundaries. We need our boundaries. There's no such thing as infinite choice. Infinite choice means no choice. You can't make a choice. There are psychological studies that have investigated this.
Yeah, 100%.
You can't make a choice between an infinite range of options. It doesn't work. You need to have something solid, a foundation that you stand on, and from that foundation to make choices. You can't allow everything to penetrate and to enter your life and then say, hey, this is great. Now we can make real informed choices. It doesn't work that way. You're born into a certain community, into a certain system, and you want to maintain the integrity of that system and to make real choices within it. But you don't want to be challenged by a plethora, an infinite range of different systems. And hey, maybe that's better. Who knows? And I think the more so in today's, culture, which can be really caustic, can be really, threatening in many ways. And it's often, in real neon lights nowadays. They're not even neon, they're LEDs. But real, powerful lights. And there are certain things that you really don't want to. You want to make a choice of not being exposed to those things, not because you're afraid of the choice, but because you know your own frailty, your own, humanity, and you know that you're drawn to certain things, and you make a decision. There are certain things that I don't want surrounding me because I know that they lead me in a direction that's less positive, that's less constructive, that can be even, destructive in a certain sense.
Of course.
And we all need to do that. We need to set our own boundaries. One of the things that I find really disturbing is people who are unable or unwilling to set themselves these boundaries, and then you know what? They don't make real choices. The choices are made for them by others, by whatever it is, whether it's by Hollywood or by other or by whatever it is, different artists, or by
fashion or anything,
or media,
of
media,
course, big influence,
things that just pervade and enter our lives, and then we lose our capacity to make informed decisions because they're being made for us by things that are just giving us all of these kind of as it were, glimpses or snippets of whether it's information or misinformation or cultural aspects, and then you suddenly find yourself in a different place altogether to where you were a year or so ago, and you think, God, how did I get here? And the answer is because you were not careful about those boundaries. So I do understand those individuals and those communities that try to set those boundaries, whether on a communal level or on an individual level. And you have to be careful. You don't want, you don't want to just be a follower. You don't want to just do what the community does or do what everyone else is doing. But on the other hand, you've got to, be careful about setting those boundaries.
I think as well, an element of my question was that menschkeit has to reign supreme no matter what community. And I think that is where people struggle. It's okay for religious communities to have their way, their parameters, and their ideas. But where it gets a bit blurred is where there's a disrespect for people who are not like them, and then they feel it. Menschkeit it has to be a given. If that's not the way of the Jew, even if the other Jew is not like you, you've still got to go back to your thing about we're all one nation. We only have each other. When menschkeit goes out the window, right, that's a problem.
Right. So menschlichkeit, or being a mensch, meaning being just an upright person and behaving in a morally upright way. I 100% agree. It begins from there. Rabbi Salanta used to say, before any other midos and mitzvahs and everything, first of all, be a mensch.
Right.
First of all, behave in an upright and moral way. And
you see that a lot in secular Jewish society. I mean, not all,
right?
But it's a big fundamental for a lot of people that I grew up with.
Let me just say, as a, some parts of Orthodox Judaism or ultra-Orthodox Judaism, they're living a war. They're living a war mentality. It's like a state of emergency. Mm-hmm. That began in Europe, Western Europe, Eastern Europe. The state of emergency of feeling under attack,
right?
Of feeling, really a kind of overwhelming, invasion of their communities by the forces of secularism, by the forces of, whatever it is, the different movements, different ideological movements of the 19th and then 20th century. Until today, a lot of these kind of communities are living in that narrative, a narrative of being under attack. And, in a certain sense, there's no one who's necessarily orchestrating this attack, but from their perspective, it's still ongoing. They are under attack in a cultural sense. They are under attack in a religious sense, certainly in their perspective of what religious integrity entails, what it means. And so they're in a state of emergency. They're in a state of defensive. And when you're in a state of emergency, then, some things can get, trodden under the tank, as it were. So you do see that sometimes. And I think I'm probably more upset about it than you are, because I'm closer, I'm there.
I'm sure.
And it's for me, it's deeply disturbing. But on the other hand, I give this kind of limud zchut, this kind of
allowance.
Well,
understanding.
I wouldn't call it an allowance, but yes, looking
historically, culturally,
however you want to put it,
right.
These fellows are really living under conditions of, or in a state of mind, of real emergency. And whether it's legit or not legit, whether they themselves are, perpetuating the state of emergency in a way that's, not necessarily predicated on reality as you might see it, looking at the bigger picture. I don't know. Without getting into the legitimacy or otherwise, you can understand that sometimes these qualities of, come on, be tolerant, not everyone's going to be the same as you, understand that you won't be able to, even if you're right, and even if you're right, but others are not going to think in the same way and they're going to think differently. Yeah, these things sometimes get lost in the thick of battle.
Just before we finish off, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the Yomim Noraim. Just a note on that. I know we've touched on it today. We're gonna finish in a sec. What can you say? A nice nugget about coming into this amazing season of the Jewish calendar.
Yeah. So, I wouldn't want to dilute the message that we've already been speaking about over the course of this conversation. So let me just strengthen it and say that, it's really amazing. We have 1 month which is filled with festival. It's a festival season. It's a season of days on which we meet, right? Every festival is called a mo'ed. Mo'ed means like a va'ad, like a meeting. It's a time to meet God. And we've got like 4 of them in the space of 1 month, right? We've got Rosh Hashanah, we've got Yom Kippur, then we've got Sukkot, and then we've got Shmini Atzeret or Simchat Torah. And then you've got a winter with nothing. Thankfully, we've got Hanukkah and Purim, which the rabbis enacted, but on a biblical sense, there's nothing there. It's all focused in 1 month. And the reason why it's all focused on this month is because this is the beginning of a new cycle of the year. It's the beginning of its life lived in you, right? The year, you wouldn't know. I mean, the sun is never changing. It's all the same. But there's a cycle there. You see, there's seasons, right? The seasons of the year, there's a cycle. It's a cycle of life. And that cycle of life, the beginning or a new beginning, that's how the Torah also calls it, right? But Betzet Hashanah, at the end of the year, at the beginning of Tikvah Hashanah, the period of the year, this is where it all begins anew, in this month, in these festivals. And when we begin anew, what these festivals urge us to do is to begin our cycle, the cycle of our own lives, to begin those anew with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with God in our lives, to draw God into our world, into our experiences. And yes, there are days of judgment, but judgment not in the, there's a certain tension in the air, we're being judged, but that judgment is a judgment because we're starting anew. We also judge ourselves. We make plans for the coming year. What are we going to do? What's worth it? What's expedient? How are we going to, make things work for the coming year? So when we make those plans, what Rosh Hashanah does is it urges us to make those plans with God. And it's about making that space, opening up, taking down that armor, going into preparing ourselves for Rosh Hashanah, for really meeting God. It's a day of meeting God. We're there, we're praying the whole day. We speak about God being the King, meaning that we trust Him, that He's a part of our lives. About Zikaron, the Torah calls it Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembering. What is this idea of remembering? It's the day on which we remember God and God remembers us. That's what it's about this memory. God doesn't forget, but it's about bringing it up. It's about living with it, about drawing it in, bringing it into our consciousness. That dependence on God. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Zocheret Amo Yisrael Tovah. He remembers us for the good. That's what He wants. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants our good. He's on our side. He's on our team. But He's only on our team if we open ourselves up to Him. And that's what these days are all about. They're about being open to God, about feeling Him, His presence in our lives. Sukkot, right? We go out into the open. We leave the comfort, the stability of our homes, and we feel Him. We feel His presence in the Sukkah. And then obviously Shmini Atzeret is that day of ultimate joy. And it's the joy because our joy can't be complete if we don't have God in our lives, because we've got this crazy uncertainty. Where's it all going? We can do our best. We can make the best plans, and we should. We should make good plans. But we need to leave that opening, because otherwise you've always got that, percentage of uncertainty. You don't know where it's going to go. And look at where we are now. There are no flights. The kids are not in school,
We've gone full circle to what we started off with.
It's all topsy-turvy,
right.
Just to show us what uncertainty really means. And I think that going into Rosh Hashanah from Corona is just that much more substantial, that much more significant. We've got the best preparation that we could ever ask for, can ever imagine, to those days, those festival days of Tishrei, of the beginning of the new year, to really draw God into our lives, to sense how everything is ultimately dependent on Him, and to really have this hope and trust in God for a great year and for a better future.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me.
David, thank you for the opportunity.
We'll do this again. There's so many more topics to talk about. It's endless.
I'm looking forward.
and appreciate it. What are you doing for the rest of the day? Going back to writing? You got a lot of writing to do?
Got a lot of work to do.
You got a lot of work to do. Dayan Pfeffer, thanks very much.
Thank you, Dave.
God
Be
bless.
well.
All the best. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.